Hello, everybody. This is Pablo with Meditation Amsterdam, where we talk about meditation, Eastern practices, life coaching, and things of that kind, self improvement, self realization. And in today's video, and I'm making two videos in a row, yesterday and today, which is very cool because there's a lot of ideas in my mind. So in today's video, I want to talk about an idea that really landed in my head in the past few weeks, and that is this whole thing around the realization of the self, and how difficult it is, why it is difficult, and also why it is so rewarding as you start to get a feel for what the whole thing is about. Now, it might be that I have to divide this video in two sections or in two episodes, depending on how far we get this time around. But what I wanted to do is to use an analogy that came to mind the other day, which helped me explain mostly to myself what the irony was and the challenge was behind self-realization. You see, whenever you're talking to someone or listening to someone who has realized themselves, they often tell you that you are always fully realized, except that you don't notice it. You know, these whole sayings about, like, you know, there's a Buddha in all of us, or you know, you always have the Buddha mind, but it's been clouded, and all these manner of things, and we can't quite understand what it is that they're talking about. And part of the reason for that is that the self that you're supposed to realize is so ubiquitous, so close to you, so much of what you are, that it's almost like it's too obvious to be noticed. And So I was thinking about this in terms of an analogy that came to mind the other day, and let's start with the analogy and see how far we get. So you can imagine for a moment that there's this vast pond of clear and tranquil water, right? And it's mirror like, because there's no wind, there's no movement, and it's completely still. And say that on this very large pond, suddenly a little bit of a draft blows, and suddenly the water creates a little whirlpool, and that whirlpool begins to spin. Now, that whirlpool becomes more and more complex over time, so that it spins on its axis, but on the periphery of it, things start to create little whirlpools of themselves, let's say, around it, and it just becomes like more complicated over time. And it becomes so complicated at some point, with so many little whirlpooly things around it and in it and underneath and so on. It becomes so very complex that it develops something of a brain, actually, right? And that brain starts to perceive things around, and it starts to notice the movement and everything that's around it and so on. And at some point, it has enough intelligence to realize, hey, I'm a whirlpool, right? It looks like here I am. I'm whirlpooling around. That's who I am, and that's what I do. And then. So the very next thing that happens is it starts to get a little bit more perception, and maybe there's some other whirlpools around it, and it starts to compare itself against those whirlpools, and it starts to check some of them out, that say that this is a clockwise whirlpool, and there are some counterclockwise whirlpools out there. And it starts to think like, man, wouldn't my life be so much better if I could hook up with that counterclockwise whirlpool over there, and we would complement each other very well. And And what about that whirlpool over there, which is a lot larger than me, you know, or a lot, it spins a lot faster. I wish I could spin that quick, and so on. So all these narratives start to arise, and but then something happens, which is that the more the whirlpool thinks of itself as a whirlpool, and the more it embodies that whirlpool consciousness, if you will, the more it feels thirsty. It feels a thirst that is inexplicable to itself, and it thinks that by acquiring the speed of that whirlpool over there, or by acquiring the size of that whirlpool over there, or by being able to pair up with that counterclockwise whirlpool over there, that thirst will subside. And so it starts to it starts to grind its wheels, right? It begins to go like, well, if I twist myself hard enough in this direction, I can acquire a little bit more spin. And then it realizes that it can spin a little bit quicker. And so as time goes by, it starts to build up, and it becomes larger and faster. But the thirst remains, right? It's bloody thirsty, and the more it does things in a whirlpool kind of way, and the more it considers itself to be a whirlpool, the thirstier it becomes, and no matter how fast or large it becomes, and no matter how many counterclockwise whirlpools it ends up hanging out with, and commingling with, the thirst never really goes away. Now, the reason I chose a whirlpool is for a couple of reasons. It's because it's a pattern, right? And because there is, of course, a big irony in a whirlpool being thirsty, because it's made of water, right? Like the very thing that it craves for is the very thing that it is. And then so then we could get into how the whirlpool gets out of that conundrum. But if we pause for a moment, then we can start to see how this whole analogy refers to the situation of a human being. So a human being is it's safe to say that a human being is utterly confused about what it is, right? It is a very, very confused entity, very confused indeed, because it is born, and it is fed with information, and it starts to train and exercise self-identity, the identity of a human being. If things go really bad, it starts to exercise the self-identity of a certain religion, a certain nationality, a certain political inclination. It espouses certain ideas, and so on, and so it adds rigidity and personhood and individuality to the notion of what it is. Yeah. But even if it's a very liberal live and let live, man, I don't subscribe to this or that, I think cross-border, global, I'm very global. I don't subscribe to this or that political thingy, or all religions have something true in them, so it's a very ecumenical human being. Nonetheless, this person considers his or herself a human being first and foremost, and therein lies the confusion, because in the ultimate analysis, you are not a human being. You're just not, right? There is no such thing as a human being when you dissect things in an intelligent way, and your perception becomes clear enough. And so what you are, just as a whirlpool is you are a pattern. You're a very complicated pattern, and that's doing its thing and has become complicated enough so that consciousness can start to express itself through you. So you're kind of a window through which light is shining, so to speak. But and then, just as a whirlpool, a human, to the degree that this entity considers itself a human being, it thirsts for something. It thirsts for completeness and love and bliss. Yeah, it is incredibly thirsty for those things. It really, really wants them. But because it's thinking of itself in certain terms, as in I am a human, then it cannot see past its own choices, so to speak. So it cannot see or conceive of ways to satisfy that thirst for love and completeness and bliss, other than to do things that its thinking human mind would conceive of. And so the thinking human mind, being the entity that it is, which is out there to essentially protect the integrity of the body, essentially, and to boost its self-importance in terms of the ego. All it can think of is of ways to acquire this person or acquire this situation, and look to the future to say, once I get this or that, then my thirst will subside. My thirst for completeness will be gone. But as it happens, that will never take place. All you need to do is look back at all the things that you've ever wanted, which you've gotten, and how quickly you become used to it and start longing for the next thing in line. So, but it's important to understand that desire is not evil. Whether it is for money or for sex or whatever, it is simply that you've misunderstood what you are and the situation that you find yourself in. In fact, you've misunderstood the fact that there is no you to even speak of. But because you think there is a you, and because you think that you is a human, and because you've identified yourself with your thinking mind and the solutions that it presents to you to quench that thirst, you don't realize that completeness, love, and bliss is what you are in the ultimate analysis. And that if you remove the barriers, so you remove the incorrect notions of what you are, and the obsessive, compulsive, and neurotic patterns of your brain, that starts to come through. And when that starts to come through, you go, so I don't need anything in the future or anything in addition to, in order to feel that love and that completeness and that bliss. But unless that realization clicks, you will find yourself in a rat race, in a hamster wheel, just trying to go faster and faster every time, trying to acquire that goodie that lies in the future, even if that goodie is spiritual enlightenment, right? So the desire for God and spiritual enlightenment is the highest possible mental desire that you can have, but it's still mental and it's still a desire, and therefore it is an incorrect understanding of how to feel complete and how to feel love and accepted and part of the whole thing. That said, because it is the more, you could call it sattvic, if you will, so we'll get into the gunas, the rajas, tamas, and sattva, but it is the most clear-headed desire that you can have, and therefore it does have the potential to lead you to a place where desire as a pattern disintegrates, and where you start to experience yourself so fully that that the need for acquisition and the need for future, or the reminiscence of the past, so the whole mental pattern of being caught in time, is brought to an end, because not because you are special, or not because you have made a massive leap of faith of just stop thinking and stop desiring, or a massive leap in terms of grit and determination and self-discipline. No, it's simply that you've woken up. You've awoken from the dream of I am this personhood self. And because you've woken up, you see things for what they are, and therefore you don't attach the value that you used to them, and you feel very good in your own skin. So the analogy that we often use, and that's why we talk about awakening, is we talk about waking up from a dream, right? When you're asleep, the value that you attach to the content of the dream, the value that you attach to the self that you think you are in that dream and to the events that are happening in the dream is huge. That's why a nightmare is so scary, and that's why dreams can be so elating, right? So they put you through an emotional roller coaster that is very intense because you're assigning very real and very tangible value to them. Now, you could get to the point where in your dream you are very detached. You're like, well, you know what? This is an amazing car, but I hereby renounce that car or that partner or that amazing job because that's my discipline, or because I am above those things. But you still believe they're real, and you still think like you're still walking on a tight rope where any what would you call it, any failure in judgment or any lapse in discipline, and there you are right back at it, buying expensive things or chasing for stuff in the future. Whereas the second you wake up from the dream, all the content from the dream loses its value completely and utterly, and you go like, it was just a dream. I don't need to be afraid about the fact that an angry dog was chasing me. I don't need to be lustful about that potential partner that was in the dream, because guess what? They're not real, right? And so when you awaken in waking life, so when you can see it in you can see awakening as a kind of endless upward ladder. So if you are asleep and you wake up, you go like, oh, I'm awake now. I realize this was a dream. If you are enlightened, you wake up from waking life to the next level, and you look at waking life and you go like, oh, how silly. I realize that all that stuff is a dream. None of it is permanent. None of it is quote unquote real. Of course it is real, right? But it isn't real in the way we think it is. And we assign it reality because we assign our person, our humanness and our personhood and our individuality with reality. They go hand in hand. So if we look at the analogy of the whirlpool, if that whirlpool realizes that it's made of water, its thirst disappears by definition. And but in order to make that leap, it must stop thinking of itself as a whirlpool. There's no other way, because no matter how fast or how large it becomes, it will always be thirsty for the very thing that it is. Something in it knows that there's something missing. Just like in our lives, we know. Some of us may have it stronger than others. Personally, I have always lived with a sense that something was just not quite right. Something in the narrative in my mind was amiss. And it is almost like, that's why The Matrix is to me such a classic movie. Because when Neo meets Morpheus, Morpheus says, there's a question like a splinter in your mind. You've always looked around and you've always perceived that this world is not what you think it is, not what you've been told it is, and that you are not what you've been told you are. And you know it, and the dissatisfaction is there, and the longing is there, but you just can't put your finger on it, and it is it's a very slippery notion. So and so once you realize, once you embody that understanding and you understand it also logically, things start to really come together, and your life starts to really morph into something else. Now, I'm almost there with the 20-minute mark for this one, so I think I'm gonna leave it at that today. And in the next video, I'm going to with maybe still with the whirlpool analogy, illustrate how a whirlpool, aka a human being, can self-realize, can start noticing like, wait a second, I'm not just a pattern that does things randomly. There's something to me. There's something fundamental to me at the very core of what I am, which has nothing to do with whirlpoolness or humanness. There's something there that is something else altogether. And it is the very thing that I've been looking for my whole life. I just didn't know it. Hence my grasping for things out there to sort of dampen that dissatisfaction and that lack of completeness, if you will, right? So as you probably hear now, I would be, to me, the utter antithesis of this entire philosophy would be Jerry Maguire's scene of "You complete me." It's like, no, dude, no person or event would ever complete you. They can't, right? They can't satisfy you. Not they can't satisfy the thirst that you have. That thirst can only, you could call it spiritual thirst if you want to call it that, right? Spiritual thirst. But it can't be satisfied by things that are external. Not because it's like, oh man, look for happiness within. Yeah, but how? And what exactly does that mean? We've turned this whole, like, things on the outside didn't make you happy. We've turned that into a soundbite, but it requires sometimes years, sometimes decades of study and effort and self-realization practices to create the mind that actually understands what that means. And once it clicks, man, things start to move very, very fast, which is why they say that yoga is a lot of churny effort for quite a period of time, and then when it takes off, it just goes up, it just explodes in your mind because it lands and then it unfolds, which has been I can attest to that. It's the experience that I'm going through at the moment, and it's very exciting. It's very cool. Not always easy. Doesn't mean that all your problems kind of disappear or whatever, but it's definitely a worthwhile journey. So that was today's video, explaining why self-realization is so damn hard to understand, so damn hard to achieve, if you want to call it that. You don't really achieve it. You just you become it. You realize it, right? It's something that it's a process that unfolds. Many say that it's not even under your control. But so there you have it. So that's an analogy to explain the topic. I hope it resonated on some level. And I'm back to making videos now. I'm enjoying it a lot again. Don't know why I ever stopped. Maybe it was because I was making my life difficult doing a little bit of editing and stuff. What I'm gonna do going forward is just record, place it raw into YouTube, and then just give it a nice little looky portrait. So cool, there you are, and hope to be making the next one pretty soon. Cheers.